All right, we've got everybody kind of coming into the room here. We'll give it just another couple of minutes as everybody gets settled. Um, I know that Barry and I talked about it earlier, and we're just really excited to be able to share this with all of you. We looked at the guest list and we saw a lot of really good friends, so it's pretty exciting to get to share it with
Absolutely.
so many people we're so close to. So Barry, if you want to go to the next slide.
Yes.
Um, I'll give you guys a quick overview about how the next hour or so, hour and a half or so, is going to play out. We're going to start with kind of these four keys that we see as kind of our process for a life of satisfaction or a well-lived life. And from there, we're going to look at then kind of how does that work and why does that work? Um, and um, and then we'll talk about how to take that to the next level, and we'll go through kind of Q&A after that, and we'd love for you all to kind of stick around for Q&A so that we have an opportunity to hear from you and get some feedback. So the last thing I'll say before we get started here is if we could just I would love to start this with the intention that we all just kind of give ourselves to this experience, and so that we can get the most out of it that we possibly can. Other than that, thank you all for being with us, and Barry, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Damien. It's a joy to have you. Thanks for making time. Damien and I have, with Gary Ravian, put in motion what we're calling Formation Labs. And that's a platform for us to offer a series of workshops that we want to form not just the behavior of people for higher performance, but we actually want to use the word formation intentionally and talk about the relationship of how it is we deepen our inner lives and not get lost there. There's a fear sometimes of taking business or leadership into the inner space, but in fact, as business keeps developing and the 21st century keeps looking for new forms of leaders, we're seeing soft skills, those can attach to a more holistic understanding of a leader's life, are in high demand. And so you're here because something resonated with you about formation. And we're going to play in between the space of developing relationships and leadership training. And we're quite comfortable with a little bit of ambiguity there because we know every day of your life you share yourself in between the interplay of those two things. Leadership is relationships. And every relationship that really goes somewhere works on a shared leadership of the people involved. And so we're bringing back together what oftentimes has been split up in seminars or attempts to help mobilize us to higher goals or getting our mission done. So formation, hopefully at the end of this, if it's new to you, you'll begin to have some language and understanding as to what it means. And as we know, it's the challenge of us is to kind of show up in the day that we're all living in, meaning not only today, but I'm thinking of all the different layers that we face each morning we get up, from economic to healthcare to climate change to a change of government. It's like we're really looking for the kind of leader that the world needs. And so you look back to a turbulent time, and one comes to mind is Lincoln. It was in the spring of 1865 at the end of the Civil War, there was an overflow of a crowd that began to gather on the White House lawn. Way before internet, it was simply the spring in people's spirits that began to collect them. And the Union Band began to appear with their instruments. And then kind of the cherry on top was Lincoln saw this happening and he came out onto the balcony. And so everyone kind of grew silent, the band and the crowd. And in that epic moment, you wonder, what does a leader say after 4 years of bloodshed in an unscripted, impromptu speech? Lincoln says, I have one request. And he turns and he looks at the Union band and he says, would you play for me Old Dixie? Well, that was the Southern States anthem. People were learning something from Lincoln about what leadership looks like. He was a leader because he knew it's not about defeating the other side that makes you victorious. It's when everyone belongs to the same healing, the same victory, that we experience what it means to be a leader. And we're moving into a time of history presently where we're acutely aware for the demand of leaders that know how to heal, bring resiliency, act with empathy, and not lose the power that we hope they can be decisive with. So here we are looking for leaders, and this workshop is about finding the one in yourself. Forming ourselves is how we shape the world. Our world doesn't get better by finding one leader. It gets better as each person looks within and hears and responds to the inner call and lead your life and what you're doing in a way that takes the responsibility you can have to make this world better. The leader's a person that's formed within. Lincoln would make speeches, and oftentimes they would move people's hearts because he had the art of metaphor. We think about metaphors because we borrow them to see something in the image that's actually true about us. So we borrow this image of trees in order to see ourselves. We are like trees. I mean, each one of us individually, each one of us uniquely. And yet we grow in the company that we share with each other. There's something of a collective, not a competitive environment where the new kind of leader rises. There's something about relationships at the heartbeat of leadership that grows who we can be. In ancient times, there would be a blessing given on a young male or young female. It would sound something like, may you and your life become as tall as an expansive tree. And that was an image that would carry someone. It gave them an identity. Yet trees in a forest actually start off as individual seeds. I love this video. I mean, that's you. Each one of our lives actually contains seeds. I would almost think of it as the DNA of not only your physical life, but the DNA of your leadership life. There is within you the ability to have character. There is within you the seed of compassion. It's there. We each get a birth date. And at some point we have an end date. And what we do with our lives, what becomes of us and our world, is how we live each day. It's how this seed opens up and grows. Everything I have to say in the next 45 minutes and the work you'll be doing with each other, you already have within you. I actually don't want you to go out and buy a new book, and I don't want you to have to go get a pile of resources on your desk. I want you to sit in the life you're living. I want you to become more introspective and reflective, because the leader within us is the leader that the world is looking for. So here we go together. Seeds push up. Formation is conflictual. We learn new patterns. We push through old normalities and old levels of standards. And we challenge ourselves to grow that seed within us, because that seed already has a coded sense of what it needs to be, what you are to be in the world. I love the quote by Thomas Merton that he says as a Trappist monk that we each have a true self, and our work is just to become who we truly are. Trees grow physically. This is where the metaphor becomes real for us, because we grow not only physically, but we grow emotionally and we grow spiritually. You don't hear a forest talking about who got to be the tallest tree. In the forest, you want to be the tree most connected, because it's in the relationship to the other trees you find your own vitality, the nourishment shared, and the diseases fought off. It's in the company and relationships of others that leaders learn to rise. So there are 4 key seeds, we might say, or traits, skills that every strong relationship and every leader needs to get a PhD in. And I mean that you want to get it in your head and you want to buy into it intellectually, but if it stays above the neck, you haven't heard formation do its work in you. And the institutions of modernity are through with head, neck up leadership. So we see these 4 words as being not only intelligent, but they become challenges to develop a competency for our own leadership. And it's simply presence, awareness, repair, and gratitude. What are you thinking now? Oh, I knew this. Yes, what you. Oh yeah, no, okay, familiar with all of those. Have a couple of books on my shelves. Just listen to a podcast on the second one. I mean, let's go home. No. No, it's something more than information. I guess just take the word presence. It sounds so simple, right? Just be present. That's a skill. Well, the skill might be simple, but the relationships you have to live that skill out in, they're complex. Here's a circle with 12 people. And you want to be present to the 12 people. But actually, what's going on in that circle is for 12 people, there are 66 relational connections that are going on. Which room did you see? We're in a time of relational complexity because although the simple traits that leaders need are known and written on, the formation to bring them into our complex lives is where the challenge lies. You know how often we usually take this challenge on? We take it on because we're high achievers. We take conferences like this, or we do workshops to sharpen ourselves. And so oftentimes we take the measures of a high achiever and we try to apply them to our desire to be present in a complex world. What that looks like is, oh, I just need better priorities. Or I need to be more efficient with my use of time. I need to make my commitments clearer. And all those could be right. But they move us to a language that's kind of like transactional. I mean, after I've been super efficient week after week, I began to ask more deeply in my life, is all this stuff that I'm doing adding up? There's so much exchange going on. Yeah, I'll pick up the kids and no, I'll make sure I get that email sent. And yeah, I got that on my checkbox. We're really killing it on exchange of contacts, but we have so little connection. And see, after a while, you can't substitute effective connections for what people most want, which is connection. So how do we connect in all this complexity? Well, to connect is to be emotionally present. And you kind of knew that from the neck up. And there's moments in the day where we feel that, but what if we made this a formational focus for our lives? To connect is to get emotionally present, and it's to understand that we are able as human beings in our leadership and our relationships to actually bring something very unique to our species. And it's called attention. Presence is saying, I am here with you. Oh, look at that picture. There she is. With someone who knows that they're being clearly chosen, focused attention given to one person, as if to say verbally, you are valuable. And I'm here to be with you. And I don't have a more important appointment anywhere in the world than the one that I have right now in front of me. That's what makes leaders effective, is they're not trying to get out of the room efficiently. They're trying to get into the room, into the people who are in the room. My friend had Mother Teresa slated as a keynote for a lunch in Santa Barbara some years back. That's hard to do. It's hard to slate Mother Teresa because she moves by the spirit, But she does honor a calendar, and the date came, and she drove up with a couple of other sisters. About 5 minutes before she was to walk into the lunch hall, where everyone's seated and waiting on her, and she says, "Hey, I would like to go in through the service entrance." And he looks at his watch and says, sold out room, tickets. But yeah, I mean, you don't say no to Mother Teresa, right? So she walks in with him and her sisters, and they go into the service entrance. And man, do I wish I had a hidden camera to let you see this video, because she starts to move at the pace of not being rushed. It's as if the whole world is somewhere else right now. She wants to be with this chef. She wants to be with this prep cook. She wants then to move over to the dishwashers. I mean, the whole ethos in the room is everyone going, me, me. In time, she finally got upstairs and gave a great keynote, and everything went terrific. But of all the things she gave that day, as she moved through a very complex world, but she gave her focus and her attention and her presence. When I heard that story, I almost idolized her. I separate saints and leaders from myself so often. Oh yeah, well, she's a saint. She's Mother Teresa. She kind of has to. Hey, think of it like this. Before she was a saint, she was someone just like us, and she committed herself to presence. And that's what got her to where she is today in our hearts and minds. Maya Angelou said, people won't remember us because we said something. They'll even not remember everything we did. But people will always remember how they were made to feel in your presence. Why that is so powerful is because our number one human desire, come on, you know it, it's to be known, to be acknowledged, not to be ranked by our vocation, not to have somebody look at our pay grade and then decide if we're important in a room. Not a room where people are looking past my name card over my shoulder to see who they can really network with. Every single person, including me, has a raging desire inside to be known. And I'm telling you, if you touch it, you'll get me. I will give you myself back. And why it's so difficult then, if it's our number one desire, it's like, well, then you would think the world would be lining up for it. But in fact, what's going on is that people are actually fighting their number one fear at the same time, which is, gosh, if I am present, then that means I'm going to be known. I don't know if I am enough. I might be getting myself in way over my ability here. I mean, I better calculate my presence, because if people see me showing up, I might really get rejected. And when you get rejected, you have a situation where you got a real paradox of, I want to belong and connect. At the same time, I'm a fearful one. I wear both. You'll never love someone well. You'll never lead a team without being seen, without being present. And it's really a call for us to step past our fear and just to really embrace transparency. Transparency. Let's simply be emotionally honest. You know, we get an image of maybe a window where the light can shine through. There's not a lot of smudging, false sense of selves. There's not a lot of pretense in transparency. We show up to be seen into. We're showing up to be seen through. It's, you know, there are teams, and when they talk about their leaders, when their leaders aren't in the room, what they want most from their leaders to be more transparent. And it's the same thing in relationships. Transparency is like a relational energy that when you decide to offer it, you begin to get into a different dynamic with the person who's receiving it. You can kind of check your connection with people according to the proportion of the level that you're transparent is probably what you're getting back from that person. Does that make sense? You don't find circles of transparency, you make them. And that means that you're the first stepper. You're the one who starts it. You initiate, you set the level appropriately, but you set the level. And good leaders and strong people in relationships are those that are actually making it safe for the other person to come forward, because transparency is what you've already begun to give. And if we don't do that, and I'll be brief because this is the negative side of it, if we don't show up in transparency, then certainly relational entropy will just begin to set in and we'll start to grow apart. And yet we'll never make a decision that we want to grow apart. But someday on down the calendar, we will not be together, and it will be because we didn't intentionalize just being transparent. So that's our first pillar. It's a point now of reflecting on someone in your own life that you want to connect with more deeply. And what Damien and I have done in designing this workshop is not to make it abstract, but actually to work inside of where you're living your life. So you pick one person and they could represent anyone. But for you, it's the person that came to your mind when you saw the question. And I would challenge you to make it not an easy person. Go ahead and pick somebody that's a little difficult. Because the more you put yourself to this exercise, the more you walk away with it. So just in your own pencil and paper, put down the name of someone in your life that you would want to connect with more deeply, and we'll hold it. I'll give you just a moment, and then I'll come back and we'll move to the second seed. While you have that person in mind, let's play just one more deep, one more question. Can you name the fear or the difficulty in words that would express the tension? Can you name a fear or use words to express the difficulty that kind of comes into the tension? Well, let's move to our second trait and our skill. You're kind of in touch with this person that you want to be more connected to. And when we want presence, what we find is that we actually need to grow self-awareness. Like if presence is my connection with another person and who I see myself and the awareness I have of myself is how I can bring that into the connection I want in my presence. So you grow self-awareness. Now, most of our self-awareness is tied to strengths. And that would make sense because things that we're good at are things that we're paid for or people affirm about us. And quickly, before we even know it, our strengths kind of become our identity. The applications we fill out, the way that we want to present ourselves to others. I mean, we want to show our best selves. We hear that language a lot. Like, what's your best self? Put that forward. And we've doubled down our identity on our strengths. But here's the issue. We're not just a bundle of strengths. In fact, we all know we have some weaknesses. And we all know that in every room we walk into, our both sides actually show up. And so what can happen is we can begin to use our strengths to actually cover our weaknesses, and we're splitting. We're actually not performing. We're strengths only. And we then have to use something to cover up our weaknesses. And so we, if you will, put on armor. I mean, in some way, strengths unguarded can actually become the armor that we wear because they hide what we mean to protect, what we don't want other people to see. Armor is something that we wear for defense. It makes you feel safe when you put it on, but it also keeps others away. Armor. When it got tense around my family of origin and we're at the dinner table, I got funny. Yeah, humor. I put it on. I could feel it coming. And you know what? I would just distract everybody. I would cut up. Other people might use an emotional outburst. They just overwhelm the situation by just getting so emotional. And in some ways you think, oh, that's so transparent. And in another way, it's like, no, they're cutting you off. They're putting on the armor. They're not willing to process their own emotions until they're with you, and then they throw them on you, and it's just like putting on their armor. Silence, we know, withdrawal, overly aggressive, whatever we use to cover parts of ourselves, places that we feel weak, become our armor. I don't mean to shame any of us. I mean for us to recognize that even if we win at hiding our weaknesses, we're only getting better at isolation. We're losing parts of ourselves that we've covered with armor. We need self-awareness. We need the both sides. We need the strengths and the weaknesses, not a heightened sense of strengths in order to hide my weakness, but we need to get the armor off. I mean, isn't that what the work is? Isn't that what the challenge is to take the armor off? But how do you do that? Because you know what's under there. I often think of the story of David and Goliath in this way. Like, why is it continuing to be such an enduring story? And I first thought, well, it's probably because underdog wins, the least armored. And I kind of like that. It has that surprise. But you know, these days I'm thinking it's an enduring story because it's about all of us. We see ourselves in these two. That story originated 3,000 years ago. But we each know that the armor we wear in the challenges that we face actually get in the way of us having what we want most, which is the connection. If I had to name a modern day David and Goliath, I'd name the guy you're looking at. Nelson Mandela, you know, he was both. He's just like us. He was thrown in a situation where he didn't think of himself as a leader. He grabbed as much armor as he could as a young man. He Goliathed up, if you can say that. He tried to win by wearing armor and strengths. And in the first half of his life, that's what leadership was. And even people were affirming him. But we went into Robin's Island, and for 27 years, he was by himself. He was then brought into a focus of learning that leadership is not wearing the biggest, thickest amount of armor you can find. He took the armor off. And he didn't lose his leadership. He became more David-like. And the people greeted him in ways that they had found their leader, who had empathy and power, compassion and decisiveness. I mean, when he stepped out without his armor, the people actually came closer. He won their hearts by taking off his armor. You're ready for the word now. It's just vulnerability. Vulner means in Latin wound. It's the ability to be wounded. Humans actually are looking for people that they can connect with. And we think, well, then you want to see my strengths. And actually, humans connect more through weaknesses than our strengths. I have to say that again. Humans connect more through weaknesses than through our strengths. Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, Gandhi. Our weaknesses is where we most connect ourselves to being human. That's the interplay in the formative mind is I actually connect more to myself when I realize my humanity has some parts of me that aren't all brilliant with strengths. We don't become trusted in relationships. We don't become trusted as leaders by wearing heavier armor. The new strength is the ability to connect, and self-awareness is how people actually understand you know yourself enough that they can trust you. We're stronger together in weaknesses than we are separated by our armor. So how do we take the armor off? Well, it usually takes a great love or a great suffering. Isn't that interesting? You'll sit with it on because you're getting away with it. But when you really want to move close and love somebody, you realize. Or when suffering comes along and you're not strong enough to take the challenge. I knew a guy who told me the relationship he had with someone he was falling in love with was coming to well, we needed to find the moment. So he was going to make dinner and have her over. And in that course of dinner, he was going to say, look, there's some things you don't know about me, and you probably need to know them about me, because as soon as you know them about me, you're probably going to want to leave. But I can't have you stand if you don't really know me. So he took the step of letting her in on this self-awareness. He took some armor off. In the course of the dinner, he began to say, I've gone through like a real troubled time in my own career, and I've actually been let go of some jobs. Like right now, I'm not quite sure my vocational track, and I've lost my main mortgage, and I'm renting right now. And I actually have kids from a previous marriage, and they're like part of the package. They're like really in my heart, and I really love my dog. I mean, my dog's non-negotiable, and he was like every reason he's expecting her to walk out the door. And what happens when he gets through with this last list? She looks at him and says, "I don't know if I've ever met someone that I feel more capable of trusting." He thought she would run out. She leaned in. The armor we wear is oftentimes just too small for the life that we're made for. And so in time, we can fit into the size of our armor, or you can begin to take it off. I want you to take a look at this slide with me. And I want you to think of the person that you pulled forward in question 1. And now the question is, you're thinking of them in your mind. What are the ways that you armor up with this person? And what weakness might you think it's covering? Take a look at this for just a couple of moments and kind of top of the mind before you work it too much. Just like what's there for you to notice of the ways that you armor up with this person. Take a moment and jot that idea down, and then what weakness might it be covering? Well, when you take off armor, yeah, and you begin to get close to people, right? What happens? And you get more likely hurt. And so you think, well, what a reward that is. In fact, why did I want to take off armor? Only to be injured. But you move in close, and we get all people's unfinished business, and we give them some of our own. And sometimes the people that we have injured the most are the ones that are closest to us, the ones who spend more time with us. And when you move in without armor, you're likely to know what it is to get injured. And a little sidebar here that might be helpful. You can turn that on yourself and almost shame yourself for letting yourself get hurt. I remember when I let somebody know a vulnerable part, and a week later, they they told the whole group that I was part of that confidential information. And I can remember walking to the parking lot at the end of that meeting. Of course, I looked cool in the meeting. I was so steamed that when I finally sat down in the car by myself, I didn't have sadness, I had madness. And I swore I would never let somebody get into me like that again. I was ashamed. And I wore that armor. In fact, what this facilitator told me about the information I had shared with her, she corrected how I was seeing it in the group. That day, I thought she could not have been more wrong. And 10 years later, I woke up one morning and it dawned on me, she was spot on. I wanted to go find a different group to share in. I wanted to find more perfect people, right? But we need armor only because we don't know how to heal. Oh, I hope that hits you. You know, you need armor. You have to wear armor unless you know how to heal. And if you know how to heal, and we can, then we don't have to wear armor. Somewhere along the way, it's like we've forgotten how to teach people that they can heal. We've become really good instructors about how to be calculated or have armor on. But if we're going to heal, we need to find a way that our relationships and the world around us actually becomes the laboratory where we learn healing. How do we repair? How do we mend? It's one word, and it's a powerful word. It's called forgiveness. Yeah, you've heard that before. But forgiveness. It's not like you need to have it told you again at the level of definition. I mean, simply forgiveness is withholding the penalty someone deserves. Or it's taking someone off the hook they put themselves on. Well, that's a definition, but you don't know forgiveness until you experience it in your bones, until it walks into your real life, and frankly, until you meet a forgiver. In my story, it was Harold. I met Harold when I moved to New York City in my late 20s with my family, and we were working there with very marginalized people. And Harold was like on the outlier of the marginalized people. He was an ex-everything. I was fascinated by his stories, and we would spend hours together, and he would tell me of growing up in the East Bowery and in poverty, and how he began to meet guys who would give him a little bit of money for running something over to another person. He just became a runner. He became a drug dealer. He got associated with the mob. I mean, my eyes were popping out. I had just moved there from the Midwest. I had just finished 93 hours of Masters of Divinity work. I mean, my library was full of all the right ways to think and live your life. I had never met a Harold. And Harold at that point in his life was in his 50s, and he was suffering from all kinds of anxiety, and he was on high doses of prednisone. And often he would knock on my door at night and say, I just need a minute. I just need a minute. You just have just a moment. I just need to understand again, I am loved, right? I'd stand in the doorway of my apartment. He was in my building. We shared the same floor. And I'd say, Harold, you're loved. Okay. I can go back. But one day the conversation moved to, we've known each other for a couple of years. He said, hey, I've actually been accepted for Section 8 housing. I don't have my own place for the first time in my life. It'll be a small apartment, but Barry, can you believe it? They actually, my caseworker thinks I can handle this. And all I need is a reference letter. And I just thought of you, naturally, we've gotten so close. Would you write me a reference letter? I'm going to need it about 4 months from now. And I'm like, Harold, I'd be honored. I mean, I'm so glad you came and asked me that. I want to see you in that apartment for sure. You deserve this. Now, I am moving to San Francisco in a couple of months. So I'll get you the letter. On your court date, you'll have it. He goes, oh, terrific. And I move, and Harold's court date comes up, and I get a call that morning from Harold. And I'm not thinking court date or anything. Out of the blue, Harold called me. Hadn't talked to him since I moved. He said, Barry, this is Harold. I go, Harold. And it begins to dawn on, right? He said, hey, I'm here with my court-appointed attorney, and I'm just, wanting to know if is the letter coming? And I go, oh, Harold. And my heart just sunk. I had totally forgotten to send Harold what he asked. The one guy in his life he wanted to trust and depend on for the thing he wanted most. And I'm the guy that said, I didn't send the letter. I forgot. I'm reaching for my armor, right? I have got shame percolating all through me. And Harold says to me, so what are you telling me, Barry? That's his next line. That you're just an ordinary guy? He goes, you're forgiven. You'll be all right. I had never had someone offer me forgiveness at the level that Harold just so inserted it right into the place that I needed it most. Have you ever wanted to forgive someone, but you just couldn't let it go? I mean, maybe it's you inside your own story. We forgive out of the resources that we have in our own experiences. You might call it a bucket. Where is it you've experienced forgiveness? Because it starts with how you've known it in your own story. And that's so true because we are so hard on ourselves. Inner critic. I would have chills weeks later realizing what forgiveness felt like. Because I was trying to offer Harold my perfect self, my well-armored strength. And it took the guy who had been the ex-everything, who had known what it was to be given mercy, to bring me the forgiveness I needed. You know, when you're hard on yourself, when you don't forgive yourself, that's what gives you permission to be hard on others. Sometimes we're better at judgment than we are at mercy, and we wonder why people aren't getting close to us. Armor is what we put on when we can't find forgiveness. And after a while, we get really good at wearing the armor. And what we really need is somebody like Harold to come in and show us what forgiveness is like. Harold knew mercy. That is what gave him the source to forgive me. Mercy is giving someone the space to be the human in their story. Mercy is giving someone the space to be the human in their story. It's putting what they did in the context of their life. And every time that we dip ourselves in mercy, we find a new, fresh supply of forgiveness. Harold gave me forgiveness because Harold had learned mercy. I had a master's degree in divinity. Harold had an understanding of what it was to be merciful. He didn't dismiss my issue. He got his apartment, thank God. But he attended to me as a person. Mercy lets us become whole. It's how we receive our inadequacies and our weaknesses and our faults. Because it's not a call for more armor. The one thing more powerful than judgment, and we're really good at that, is when we have mercy given to us from another. So what if I became better at healing than wearing armor? Well, for me, I needed to borrow the mercy of Harold to make it my own. We heal by forgiving ourselves and others through just a mindset of mercy. So with that in mind, this third question of skills and traits that we want to build as we are working with our relationships and our leadership. The person that you're working on, that you've shared with in the breakout. Here's the third question. In your relationship with this person, how might you not be so hard on yourself? See, the game changes sometimes when we do our work, when we become aware of something on our side, how might you not be so hard on yourself? Now, just where you're sitting, take a moment and put to paper some of the thoughts or things that you're thinking of at this point of where you need to relax on yourself, not be so hard. And then I have a second question. The second question is, what act of forgiveness would allow them to let down their armor? Imagine what might they be carrying that you could forgive? And it would allow them to take off some of the armor. What do you suppose they might be covering? Take a moment and then we'll move to our fourth and last trait. The fourth trait that builds good leaders and brings people into connection relationally is gratitude. It's a word I use for satisfaction or joy. It's gratitude. The more you're present in your world and the more self-awareness you have of yourself, the more you don't need to wear armor because you can repair. It just seems like you have more bandwidth to get out and to see what is out there that can be good and beautiful and wonderful. This baseball story came to mind because I had a friend tell me that he had an old friend that was turning on his birthday like 66. And one of the guys that knew him thought for his birthday, wouldn't it be cool if he took a baseball and sent it around to like 17 of this guy's close friends and they'd all sign it. So this was quite a project because you got snail mail going on. So one guy signs it with a Sharpie, he mails it to the next guy, and they do this trail until everybody has signed the baseball. And then they mail it to the birthday boy. And he receives it. Of course, he didn't know anything was going on. And now he's opened the box on his birthday and he's sitting at his desk and he pulls out the baseball and he realizes it's not signed by baseball players. It's like guys that he's actually gone to life with, that he's walked with, that have known him through the years. And it becomes like so incredibly special because they all took time. He starts to realize the work that went into it. And 17 guys have signed it. He spins it and he looks, but what happens while he's sitting in the chair is he's actually thinking of a guy that about 18 months ago, they kind of had a riff, had a little bit of a fallout. They weren't as tight as they used to be. I wonder if he signed the baseball. So the guy sitting in his chair on his birthday has 17 signatures of a baseball and he's spinning it because he's looking for number 18 who's not there. So now he's got a baseball sitting on his desk and it's either a baseball that says 17 people are with you and they've got you and you've got them, or it's a baseball that says, yeah, he didn't sign. What's it going to look like in your life to have gratitude? How are we going to learn to begin to see what's there and not focus on what's not there and then try to strive to get it to be there? It's not having more. It isn't. It's about developing the sight to see what it is that you have. We grow gratitude by looking at what's there. We observe something into appreciation. We did a workshop one time at Singularity University with a bunch of high achieving entrepreneurs, and we totally underwhelmed them by saying, at the beginning of the day, we'll have you all day, we're giving each of you an egg, and you're to carry this egg throughout the day. And then at the end of the day, you'll turn in your egg. And the first thing we want you to do is spend 15 minutes with your egg. They're like, what? We were trying, and we finally, I think, accomplished the breakthrough that when you spend time just looking at something as ordinary as what's around you, you begin to learn appreciation for it. You begin to actually see it. We grow gratitude in our lives when we begin to see what's there. It's a mindset. And the more that we have this inner acknowledgement of what is there, guess what happens? Outwardly, we begin to amplify and give praise for the things that we see around us. We tend to spill that out on people. We start to notice it in places where we're at. Inner acknowledgement of gratitude actually builds the outer acknowledgement of praise. When you praise, you're lifting someone's spirits. Praise is such an infusion of energy relationally. My first job, I was 15 and a half, and I was at an ice cream store. I was dipping it, and my job was to close it at night, mop the floors, scrape clean the grill, restock the milk, eggs, butter, and ice cream. I was the last one out. It came time for a raise after about 3 months. My manager came to me and said, man, you're killing it, and I hired you underage, so I can't show you as receiving a raise. But I just got to tell you, you're like one of the best employees I've hired in a long time. Oh my gosh, shoulders back. I walked out that store that night with my real raise. I mean, it's the same white shirt, white pants with the apron. I'm in the same job, but I'm like a different person. And why? Because somebody put a little praise my way. The power of that is amazing to me. Whether you're giving it or receiving it, there's something about the human being that knows we're in the ecosystem and the flow of what pulls out of us what we have to give. It's what's there. Sometimes we don't see it. We think it's missing. 2 cautions that usually limit our praise. One is often we wait for someone to finally show a good result, then we add praise. My daughter ran cross country, and I saw in the first match, all of the parents are at the finish line. And so it just hit me. I want to be at the mid-course floor. I mean, when you're at mile 8 and 12, I want to be a voice there saying, come on. You don't want to wait for the results. The energy needed is when you're in mid-course. The second is the praise sometimes has to be conditional. In other words, we kind of have standards for teams and for people and for partners. And when they hit that standard, we really praise them up. The secret side of that is that often we reserve our praise because we don't want to start praising them when they haven't quite hit the high standard we had for them. And so we dry up our praise, which means we dry up our world. It begins to shrink and become a very small world of praise. And guess what? Your kids and your teams aren't dying to be part of that small world. So what you want to do is take an action step. I would say find one good thing that the person that you're working with in the reflective questions, find one good thing that they do, that they love doing, and attach it to them with praise. Let them know it again. Because whatever it is that they love doing, let's just say if it's hiking in nature and they are so much more alive and they point out and see things in nature that most people would miss, when we attach them to what happens to them in nature walks, they begin to have a relationship to something greater than themselves. And all you did was praise them. So the question in the 4th trait is, how could you see them for who they are and praise them for it? What if you turn that same praise towards yourself. It's a 1 and a 2 question. You look at them, observe them. Don't see what's not there. What's there? What would you praise them for? And then sometimes the hardest person we're on is ourselves. Like, then turn that same gaze internally and see about you. What is it that you can really sense and have gratitude for? I'll give you a moment to work with this question. Damien, you think we should move to the next slide?
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Okay. It's kind of a wrap up that I love this statement. It's presence that we secretly desire from others and what others are seeking from us. And it's by taking off our armor that we become more present, which we don't need to fear because we will heal ourselves through mercy, which gives us access to praise and the power, I think, to change the world. So I would say, take the work you've done in these questions and challenge yourself to have the conversation. And Bill said we're challenged by the COVID time, but how is it that you might communicate to the person that you are working with what it is now that you've gotten some traction and clarity on? I mean, sometimes there's I see it all. And sometimes it's just a little start. I hope you at least have a first step, a first start to being able to say, how do I take this almost as a homework now and apply it into a relationship? And you'll both grow. We know that. And the change, most importantly, might not be in them. The reward of all of this is the person you get to become. It's hard to lose when you're working on transformation. If you look at this next slide, you can kind of see on the left what we've just been through in ways of maybe where we were walking in at or stuck. I think the right begins to show us some measurable outcomes for our leadership and our relationships. Moving from hiding to transparency. We talked about wearing armor to the ability to heal. From holding penalty to forgiving yourselves and others. See what's missing to gratitude and praise. Isn't that helpful that what we just did in the last moments together is actually beginning to open up what begins to flow for us? And on the left is kind of transaction. If you continue to wear the armor, if you continue to hold the penalty, if we continue to see what's missing, we can keep transacting in the world. You can keep your same job. You can be at the same level in the relationships you're at. But transformation is where we change you. We look at you as the one who can offer transparency. You are the one who are beginning to learn how to heal. And that transformation brings such a different connection for people to begin to realize that we're doing our work and our life as well. I think it's what leadership and relationships are looking for from us. So you look back on these words of presence, self-awareness, right? Repair and gratitude. And these outcomes I just showed you in the prior slide build on these skills. So we're clear with the skills. But the question we asked from the beginning is, why is it so difficult to know something, but we have such a struggle in order to put it into the way that we show up in the world? Because information is just simply not enough. It's more than a matter of knowing what to do. Behavior is not changed by information. It's seeking a deeper change from what you do to changing who you are. I don't want to get on a slippery slope, but I don't want to miss going down to the level of where ancient wisdom brought leaders through all the time. And deep relationships found maturity by moving from skills of information down to a sense of being. For instance, when Mother Teresa went to that luncheon that day, she didn't say, oh yeah, I've got to do that leadership thing of presence. It wasn't a skill. It wasn't information. Mother Teresa was the kind of person that she knew what she wanted to do at that time allotted her. She wasn't trying to do something. She was being someone. And formation is being someone at the deeper level. And when you learn to be the person at the deeper level, you have a greater performance and a greater output of external activity. But most degrees take us to the skill-based performance skills, and we don't do the deeper work, and it just becomes very frustrating. And so that's why I think the connection of each one of these four skills actually wants to belong to something deeper at the foundation of the base of our being. So we've come up with some very easy words, I think: to be, to become, to belong, and to do. I don't know a more just raw set of what humanity is about as human beings than our being, our becoming who we are, our belonging to others, and our doing good living in the world. I mean, that's us. That's what we're looking for. So if you could just kind of see it with me, you would like recognize that to be present is a skill. I want to do that. I have the information on it, and I realize good leaders do it, people building relationships do it. But for that to take place in my life, it's actually a call to become aware of the broader reality. Okay, whoa, where's broader reality? She says to me, were you there? And I said, well, yeah. Well, did you see what the kids were telling you? You know, they said, Dad, did you hear your tone of voice? And I said, no, I was there, but I was not aware of that. In this first pillar of awareness, we grow a broader reality by looking at the science of biases. And we do some rethinking of our thinking. In the workshop after this, we'll work on a non-dual mindset. We'll see more reality than canceling the reality I don't want to see and staying with what I do see. Because we know it's our outer actions, if they're going to have new choices, have to come from a deeper awareness within us. Make a little bit of sense? We'll be quicker on the next one. So the skill is self-awareness. Well, okay, you should be more self-aware. We agree, but we hit resistance being aware of things that we're not aware of unless we're brought into a more authentic identity. And in this second pillar, we become authentic in our identity by recognizing a true self and a false self. We have roles, but we are not roles. And we begin to integrate an authentic sense of our own selves in what we do. To mend, to repair, it's a skill. And it comes as we learn how to belong to true community. No one is healed or becomes capable of healing outside of relationships. And so we're going to put you down into the importance of being authentic in relationships and communities in this third pillar. So you can learn then to take off the armor. You can learn the vulnerability. You can learn to develop an inner ring for your own life of deep relationships. We can move better than accountability. We can actually learn to be restorative, generative communities for one another. And when we do, we belong at deeper and deeper levels. And then finally, the fourth pillar that kind of completes this circle is to do. This is your work word, your mission. This is the bringing gratitude and satisfaction to what it is you're doing in the world. We do our mission with satisfaction rather than try to get satisfaction from our mission. I mean, how many people try to find a job that will make meaning and fail to bring their meaning to what it is they do as their job? Then in this fourth workshop, we're talking about how it is that we discover meaning and we bring it to what we do. We're going to talk about why it is that we so often move from dissatisfaction, trying to get satisfied, rather than starting with satisfaction and moving that out into the world. So our doing and our being, the formation, the skills from the deeper process of our lives begin to really form and shape us. And as they do, these four pillars become really a well-researched kind of ancient work, as well as most science today will tell you, this is what the new leader looks like. This is what relationships in a complex world actually require. And it's our heartbeat to make this accessible and available. So I want to, Damien, take us, if you would, through the next few slides so that people can kind of see how this works together. And then I'll take it back at the end and we'll close.
Appreciate that, Barry. And it's getting to this for us around kind of where this all builds to and what we make of it. And ultimately this cycle is something that's found in all cultures all around the world. It's the way we form and reform our identity in order to match it to the context that we're living in. Joseph Campbell did the study on this and called it the monomyth. And he called it the monomyth because it's present in all cultures all around the world for as long as we have recorded history. And you might be more familiar with it as the hero's journey. And the hero's journey always has these four parts. It's like this awakening, and then they go through some kind of training, and then the conflict, and then a return. And so we've partially modeled these pillars after this same hero's journey. And so it's a way to bring us through each stage of this. And if you look back at our pillars, between the hero's journey and these pillars, it's first we come, we go through this over and over in stages in our life as we redevelop our identity. That's actually like, when Luke goes to Dagobah and he's like doing training with Yoda, right? That training is actually an exploration of self. And then the conflict that we come to in a story, the hero's main conflict, it's actually bringing that identity out into the world. And it always comes back to a return. And that return is how we, bring that identity back as a master of both worlds. So there's actually two hemispheres going on here. If you divide it this way, then you have self versus context. Half of it is looking at the self, and the other half of it is bringing that self out into context. And then if you divide it the other way, you're looking at outer world, and then you go to the inner world and back to the outer world again. And so why the return? I always thought that was interesting. In all of these stories, whether it's Tolkien and Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or Star Wars, anything that's following the hero's journey, they always come back. Like, well, they just leave the old world behind and never return. And it's actually because it's a call for us to go do this inner work. And Campbell says that they return a master of both worlds. So the idea is to take the lessons you learn on the inner and use those to become a master of your outer world. But ancient cultures, along with their myths, also had rites of passage. And the rites of passage were how we translated the story from a story to your story, from storytelling to story living. And in large portion, that's what we've lost. This used to be our norm, but rites of passage were the known way people formed and reformed their identity. And our world is changing now more than ever before. And so it becomes even more important, more common that we need to form and reform our identity and make it and contextualize it back into the world we're living in. And in fact, we're doing it less than we ever have in history. And so, it was upon that realization that me and Barry started to look at how could we create a program that would kind of bring the real purpose of rites of passage back into our lives. A way to, explore our reality, explore ourselves, and then give that back to the world. So we synthesized this ancient wisdom with the lessons we've learned from our own experiences in working with people, and then with a whole bunch of new science to kind of see how we could do this the best way possible. And what we realized is you don't go through this journey once. Especially for as you age, you might feel like, oh yeah, I remember doing, going through these big trials when I was 30, right? But it's a circle. It's always a circle, because by the time you come to the beginning again, it's time to start again. And so the way I started thinking about it is similar to another kind of cycle that we look at, right? So when we look at the way we orbit our sun, we tend to think of it in a circle or an elliptical orbit. But it's actually just a matter of perspective that we're always seeing it. In reality, while we're always starting again, we're also always moving forward. And the hero's journey is actually really similar. We're actually constantly, going through the cycle over and over again, but each time it's contextualized anew with where we are in our life at that time. And so we end up traversing, while we're going through these stages of maturity in our life, each time you go through that hero's journey, you go through it anew. And so we don't need to just one time take a look at who we think we are out in the world, and then what does that mean in the context and community that we're living in. We need to do that continually. And we need to do it, especially during times when there's a major change to our identity, or there's a major change to our community, because it's always this inflow and outflow of who am I and how is that lived out in the world that I live in. And so the number of times you've gone through the hero's journey, actually, like, the longer this helix becomes. And that's actually the length of that helix determines your level of relational maturity. And that dictates your capacity to manage relational complexity and increasing your ability to be, become, belong, and do in ways that only guided maturity can accomplish. So kind of how does this all come together, right? And how do we fit this into a system? And Barry asked me that question. We ended up thinking about this quote from Archimedes. And Archimedes said, "Give me a place to stand and I'll move the world." And if we look at this diagram, the person in the image you can see as yourself. And then on the other end of the diagram, you have the world, which you can imagine that's like the context that you live in, right? Your society, your culture, your community, your family, your friends. And each of us desire to make some level of impact there. This lever is the tool by which we impact our world. And that's actually our identity. Our identity, we understand now through psychology and sociology, we understand that the identity only forms as an interface with the world, right? A well-formed identity makes a strong lever. And a poorly formed identity makes a weak lever that could break. And the strongest identity one can adopt is called leadership. Leadership isn't a role or an action, it's an identity. It's a way of viewing yourself as responsible for your life and its impact. And it's people who traverse this journey, who take on the responsibility to continually develop themselves and that identity. That's what a leader is. Not somebody who's appointed and, not somebody who completes the journey. It's just choosing to take it. Just being in development makes you that leader. But the lever itself isn't where leverage comes from. Ultimately, our leverage is determined by the fulcrum. And the fulcrum is developed by your level of relational maturity. So the longer your helix, the more you're going through this cycle and defining and redefining yourself and then contextualizing it into the context of your life, the more that fulcrum moves over from the right down to the left. So you can imagine if that fulcrum was nearest you, you could push and push on that lever and you're not going to have much impact towards the world. But as you move your maturity down to the left, even a small act makes a big impact to your world. And so, again, you can think of people like we've mentioned already, Mother Teresa or Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, Martin Luther King. These are people who even simple acts had major reverberations to their world. And it has to do with that level of maturity, moving that fulcrum close to the world. It's the amount of times that we go through this development over and over that determines that maturity.
Mhm.
And so that kind of brings us down to like the program that we've created and the way that we've realized that we think we can help people along this journey. And so, Barry, I don't know if you want to take it.
Now, I'm loving thinking all the way back. I mean, you had me thinking helix and science and Darth Vader, and then we had all the way back to Archimedes and the lever and it is this ancient future wisdom that we see in people's lives. And what I said in the beginning, I want to return to, we're not looking for one leader to vote into office. That's the old paradigm of modernity. Huge institutions, chain of command, one person at the top. The innovation now is finding the leader within each one of us and coordinating that in a culture where formation and not just behavioral standards are actually offered and accessible. We have to become intelligent. We're not asking you to try these things. We're asking you to train. And in training, going through the helix, working on the identity, taking it back into community, taking it over into mission, you begin to see the value, at least that we believe in. We design at Formation Labs of a person who would be fully alive. We design for that. What does it mean to be generative throughout your whole life? We recognize that we're in a world where these headlines have us more and more reaching for cover and for armor and for silos. But I think that this outer world of complexity actually gives way as we form the inner world that we have this understanding now to do with each other. I do think it takes community. So rather than making this a personal field of study for you, Damien and I, with Gary Rabian, have thought of a cohort experience where we could take 10 weeks starting in 2021 and do 2 workshops on each pillar. So you will skill build and you'll see it measurable, but it will be because you have a curated, directed experience into the being foundations that we've been focusing on. In every generation, there seems to be those who engage the wisdom of the past while they're holding the tools of the future, right? And there are people who can think of relationships between things like body and spirit, person and community, past and present. We call these people spiritual emissaries. I hope that causes an imagination of curiosity to kind of explode inside of you. I hope your brain is kind of like tantalized, but I hope something in your spirit resonates with the idea of what if we could put together lives and send them, if you will, not so much entitled leadership, but do the formation work where we could deploy people into the world without title, but had the power of this formation in their lives. They were good at healing. They were models of vulnerability. We believe that spiritual emissaries is kind of what the world is ready to find and to look for. And so that's what our call is. If it resonates with you, then we want you to find us. We want you to find out how this cohort that will be put together January through April can maybe fit into your schedule. I say to close the question that I hope you're pondering all this information with is, what do you want? Because we believe if you really listen to your heart, there's an awakening to this call of being something of a spiritual emissary, someone alive within, moving further out into the world, bringing it into what we're already defined in the leadership and the relationships that we've been granted. If you chose to take this next step, I would just say in closing, it's a robust training. It'll be very interactive. Matter of fact, you will not have as much presenting back to back as we've just done here to kind of give you the overall picture. But we'll do a deep dive into the leader's journey that we just showed you. And you'll have a way of assessing and evaluating where you currently are. I think that will be important. You'll see content and material that is well thought out, draws from different sources. I have a background, I said a couple of times, of Master's of Divinity, to take the teachings of Jesus. There's wisdom in that. You look over to other people who had discipleships, who brought in other cultures and time, a quality of life and leader. We look into the sources that we have at this time in our life. And we bring them together so that there's a way of being able to learn from maybe what's the best we have there of knowledge, but we actually put it into practice. And we'll do it in community. Like I said, we'll do it through a cohort. There'll be peer-to-peer learning. You'll get tight. I think there'll be new levels of people engaging with each other and having aha moments together. And there'll be coaching and mentoring on the side. At the end, if COVID will let us, we're going to have a retreat. And we'll actually sit, maybe, and if not, then we'll make our most creative venue on the Zoom. But that's what it would look like to take the 10-week 4 pillars. Damien, back to you as we close for like what kind of details would be for signups, and then I would like to have a few questions and see what people are thinking or asking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be touching base with everybody who joined us today. Also, feel free to contact us directly if you want more information about this program in order to sign up. We're going to be doing this workshop one more time before the new cohort starts. So if you know somebody who you think would be appropriate for this workshop or might be interested in the larger cohort, definitely let us know. And yeah, we'll be in touch. Mostly, we're just grateful to be able to share this with you. It's been a labor of love. We started talking about this a year ago, and then really developing this the last 6 months. And I know for myself and for Barry, it's something we care really deeply about.